The distress signal came in at 3 in the morning, Earth Standard Time. A Thistic trade convoy, 47 ships carrying medical supplies and food, was under attack in the Keth Corridor. Pirates. The Skren Marauders had brought an armada of over 200 warships, and they were tearing the convoy apart like wolves among sheep. The closest Galactic Concord fleet was 9 hours away. The closest human patrol was 40 minutes out. Captain Dara Singh of the HSS Northwind did not wait for orders. She turned her small battle group of 6 frigates toward the corridor and pushed the engines to maximum. By the time they arrived, 11 Thessic ships were already burning. Her frigates dove straight into the fight, shields forward, guns blazing. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it was over, the Marauders were gone. 36 Thessic ships were saved, and 2 human frigates were shattered metal, drifting through space. 340 human crew members were dead. Back on the great orbital station called Nexus Primus, where the Galactic Concord held its meetings, no one said thank you. Instead, Trade Minister Urani of the Thessic Combine filed a formal complaint. The humans, she said, had responded too slowly. The 11 ships lost were worth billions in trade value. She demanded compensation. Ambassador Ilara Voss read the complaint in her office and set it down very carefully on her desk. She sat in silence for a long time. 340 of her people were dead, and the species they had died to protect was asking for money. She was 62 years old. She had spent 30 years serving humanity in the Galactic Concord. She had watched, year after year, as humanity gave everything and received nothing. Not respect, not gratitude, not even basic recognition. She was tired in a way that sleep could not fix. The next morning, she requested time to speak before the full Concord Assembly. The Great Chamber was enormous, built to hold representatives of over 4,000 species. It was a cathedral of alien voices, a place where the fate of the galaxy was decided. And in this place, humanity had always been treated like a child, sitting at the adults' table. Speaker Zelthos, of the Velkari, the insectoid who chaired the assembly, granted her 5 minutes. He did this with a wave of one of his 4 arms, barely looking at her. Ilara stood at the central podium. Around her, thousands of alien faces looked down from their seats. Some were curious. Most were bored. She began to speak. She did not raise her voice. She did not beg. She simply told them the truth. In the past 100 years, she said, humanity had mediated 67 wars between Concord species. Human engineers had designed and built over 12,000 FTL relay stations, the very network that allowed faster-than-light communication across the galaxy. Human doctors had developed treatments for diseases on worlds they had never even visited. Human ships ran 80% of all deep space rescue operations. Human financial institutions had quietly backed the galactic economy for 2 centuries. Human soldiers had bled and died on the frontiers so that the inner worlds could sleep in peace. And what had humanity received in return? She told them about the vote 6 months ago, when the Concord had refused to fund a memorial for human soldiers killed in the Frontier War. She told them about the trade restrictions that made it nearly impossible for human merchants to compete fairly. She told them about the jokes, the insults, the way Concord diplomats called humans the galaxy's loyal dogs when they thought no one was listening. And she told them about the 340 crew members who had died yesterday to save Thessic ships, and about the complaint that was filed in response. The chamber was quiet for a moment. Then Speaker Zelthos clicked his mandibles, which was the Velkari way of laughing. The young species is feeling sensitive today, he said. The chamber erupted in laughter. Zelthos then introduced a motion that had been in preparation for weeks. He proposed reducing humanity's voting weight in the Concord by half, arguing that humans were overrepresented relative to their territorial holdings. It was a slap in the face, dressed up in legal language. The vote was called. 3,100 species voted in favor. 940 voted against. The motion passed. Ilara watched the numbers appear on the display. She felt something shift inside her. Not anger, something quieter and much heavier. It was the feeling of a door closing. She returned to the human delegation quarters. A message was waiting for her on the secure channel from Earth. It was from the United Governance Council, the body that spoke for all of human civilization. The message was short. Ambassador Voss, you are authorized to execute Directive Omega. Bring our people home. Directive Omega. She had known about it for years. Every human ambassador did. It was the plan that no one believed would ever actually be used. The complete and total withdrawal of humanity from the Galactic Concord. Every treaty, every alliance, every trade agreement, every shared system, everything. She sat with the message for 1 hour. Then she stood, straightened her uniform, and walked back to the great chamber. She requested the floor one final time. Zelthos, still amused from his earlier victory, granted it. The chamber grew quiet as Ilara placed a small metal object on the speaker's podium. It was Earth's charter seal, the symbol of humanity's membership in the Concord, carried by every human ambassador for nearly 300 years. Effective immediately, Ilara said, her voice calm and steady. The United Human Systems formally withdraw from the Galactic Concord. All treaties are terminated. All mutual defense agreements are void. All trade agreements are cancelled. All shared infrastructure obligations are ended. We are leaving. She paused and looked across the chamber one last time. You will not hear from us again. Then she turned and walked out. Behind her, the chamber erupted, but it was not in shock. Thousands of alien voices filled the great hall with amusement. Some clapped, some cheered. Speaker Zelthos leaned back in his chair and said the words that would haunt the galaxy for years to come. Let the children sulk, he said. They will come crawling back within the month. Outside the chamber, Ilara Voss walked down the long corridor toward the human docking bay where a shuttle was already waiting. Her staff fell in behind her, carrying boxes of personal belongings and files. No one spoke. There was nothing left to say. As the shuttle pulled away from Nexus Primus, Ilara looked back at the enormous station through the window. It was the heart of galactic civilization. Thousands of ships surrounded it. Lights glittered from every surface. She thought about the 12,000 relay stations that human hands had built. She thought about the patrol routes that human ships would no longer fly. She thought about the treaties that human diplomats would no longer hold together. She thought about every system, every network, every quiet piece of work that humanity had done for centuries without praise. And she wondered how long the lights would keep glittering. On the bridge of the HSS Perseverance, stationed at the edge of the Sol system, Admiral Kale Marin received the confirmation signal. Directive Omega was active. He opened a channel to every human ship, station, and outpost in the galaxy. All units, he said, come home. On the first day, the galaxy barely noticed. The news channels ran the story for a few hours. Most species treated it as a joke. Humans were emotional creatures. Everyone knew that. They would cool down, realize how much they needed the Concord, and come back with their heads low. The betting markets on Nexus Primus gave it 2 weeks. On the second day, the human engineers began shutting down the relay stations. There were 12,412 FTL relay stations spread across the galaxy. These stations made faster-than-light communication possible. They were the veins and arteries of galactic civilization. Without them, a message that took seconds to deliver would take months or years traveling at light speed. And humanity had built them. Every single one. The shutdown was calm and organized. Human engineering teams arrived at each station, powered down the systems, removed the proprietary components that made the relays work, wiped the software, and left. They did not damage anything. They did not sabotage. They simply took back what was theirs and moved on. By the end of the first week, over 300 relay stations had gone dark. The first real panic started on day 14. The Outer Keth Corridor, a major trade route connecting 18 species to their colony worlds, lost all relay coverage overnight. 18 civilizations suddenly could not talk to their own colonies. Ships in transit lost navigation data. Emergency channels went silent. It was as if someone had cut the phone lines to an entire continent. The Velkari, the most politically powerful species in the Concord, sent their best engineers to examine the dead relay stations. What they found terrified them. The internal architecture of the stations was so deeply human in design that their scientists could not even read the technical diagrams. The coding language was human. The materials used in the core processors were manufactured only on Earth. Without human knowledge, the stations were nothing more than expensive metal boxes floating in space. Speaker Zelthos held a press conference and told the public that repairs would be complete within days. Behind closed doors, his own advisors told him the truth. They could not fix the relays. They did not even understand how they worked. On day 21, the first war started. The Dragari hegemony and the Ul Communion had been enemies for 800 years. Humanity had negotiated the ceasefire between them over a century ago, and human mediators had maintained it ever since, sitting in the room during every dispute, calming tempers, finding solutions. Without those mediators, there was no one left who understood both sides, no one both sides trusted. A border dispute over a mining world turned into a shooting match. The shooting match turned into a naval battle. Within a week, both sides had mobilized their full fleets. The Concord sent a peacekeeping envoy to stop the fighting. But the envoy fleet arrived with half its supplies missing, because the logistics ships that normally carried their food, fuel, and equipment had been human-operated. The translators assigned to the mission could not handle the 14 dialect forms of the Draugari language. Only human linguists had ever mastered all 14. The peace talks failed before they even began. By day 30, the Skred marauders had figured out that the human patrols were gone. The marauders were pirates, raiders, and slavers. For decades, they had been kept in check by human warships that patrolled the frontier corridors. Humans were the only species willing to do that dirty, dangerous, thankless work. Now the corridors were empty, and the marauders moved in like a flood. 3 Thessic trade hubs were attacked and looted in a single week. Cargo ships were captured. Crews were enslaved or killed. The Thessic Combine, one of the richest powers in the galaxy, suddenly could not move goods safely through their own territory. Trade Minister Urani, the same official who had filed a complaint about humanity's slow response just weeks earlier, sent a private message to Ambassador Ilara Voss. The message was polite, almost begging. She asked if perhaps some quiet arrangement could be made. A few human patrol ships, just in the worst areas. Nobody needed to know. Ilara read the message. She thought about the 340 crew members who had died saving Thessic ships. She thought about the compensation demand. Then she wrote back a single line. "We wish you the best in resolving your security concerns." By day 45, the galactic economy began to crack. It turned out that human cargo ships carried nearly 40% of all goods moved between star systems. Human trade routes were the most efficient. Human crews were the most reliable, and human freight companies offered the best prices. With those ships gone, the cost of moving goods doubled, then tripled. Shelves went empty on worlds that had never known shortage. Worse, the financial system itself was shaking. For 2 centuries, human banks had quietly served as the backbone of galactic finance. They underwrote loans between species. They guaranteed trades. They provided the trust that made the whole system work. Because here was the thing about humans that nobody had wanted to admit. They were the most trusted species in the galaxy. Not the most powerful, not the most advanced, the most trusted. When a human made a deal, they kept it. When a human signed a contract, it was honored. That reputation had become the invisible foundation under the entire galactic economy. Now that foundation was gone, and nobody trusted anybody. By day 60, people began to die. Not in wars, not from pirates, from medicine. Dozens of species depended on medical compounds that were manufactured in human biotech laboratories. Treatments for diseases that had been cured decades ago suddenly became unavailable. On the ammonia world of Wretch 4, a plague broke out among the native population. The only effective treatment was a drug synthesized exclusively in human facilities. Without it, the plague spread unchecked. Thousands died in the first week. Tens of thousands followed. The Concord sent emergency medical teams, but they did not have the formula. They did not have the equipment. They did not have the knowledge. Human pharmaceutical companies had shared their products freely with the galaxy for generations, but the science behind those products had always remained on Earth. Nobody had ever bothered to learn it. Why would they? The humans would always be there to provide it. On day 90, Speaker Gelthos called an emergency session of the Concord. The great chamber, which had been filled with laughter just 3 months earlier, was now filled with fear. Representatives shouted at each other. Some blamed humanity. Some blamed Gelthos. Some blamed themselves, though only quietly and never on the record. Gelthos proposed sending an envoy to Earth to demand humanity's return. Not to ask, to demand. The motion passed without a single vote against it. A grand fleet of diplomatic vessels was assembled. Hundreds of ships from dozens of species, polished and decorated, carrying the most senior officials the Concord could gather. They jumped to the Sol system, expecting to arrive at Earth's doorstep with overwhelming authority. They were stopped at the beacon line, the border of human-controlled space, by a single human corvette. It was a small ship, barely armed, crewed by perhaps 30 people. A young lieutenant appeared on the communication screen. She was calm. She was polite. She looked like she was maybe 25 years old. "Sol system is sovereign territory," she said. "You have not been invited. Please hold your position at the beacon line. A response to your request for audience will be provided within 6 to 8 standard weeks." 6 to 8 weeks. The grand fleet of the Galactic Concord, representing 4,000 species and trillions of beings, sat in the cold dark of space and waited, because there was nothing else they could do. Inside the Corvette, the young lieutenant ended the transmission and leaned back in her chair. Her communications officer looked at her with wide eyes. 6 to 8 weeks, he said. "That's what we tell people waiting for a mail package." The lieutenant smiled. "I know," she said. Somewhere far behind them, past the beacon line, past Mars, past the moon, Earth turned slowly in the sunlight, quiet, untroubled, home to a species that the galaxy had laughed at 90 days ago. Nobody was laughing anymore. The Galactic Concord did not collapse all at once. It bled out slowly, like a wounded animal that did not know it was dying. By the 3rd month after humanity's withdrawal, the Grand Diplomatic Fleet was still sitting at the beacon line, waiting for an audience that had not been granted. Every few days, the young lieutenant on the human corvette would send the same polite message. "Your request is being processed. Thank you for your patience." The alien diplomats aboard those ships, creatures who had ruled empires and commanded armies, sat in their luxurious cabins and did nothing, because there was nothing they could do. Back on Nexus Primus, the Concord was tearing itself apart. Without human mediators to smooth over disagreements, Every session of the assembly turned into a screaming match. Old grudges that had been buried for centuries came roaring back to life. The Velkari tried to hold things together, but Speaker Gelthos quickly discovered a painful truth. His species had always been politicians. They were clever with words, they were skilled at making deals, but they had never been the ones who actually made things work. That had always been the humans. The Velkari could talk about power, but they could not keep the lights on. 7 species withdrew from the Concord in a single session. Then 12 more the following week. Each blamed the others. Each pointed fingers. Nobody pointed at themselves. The Draugari-Ul War, which had started as a border dispute, had now grown into a full-scale conflict across 40 star systems. Warships clashed in the darkness between stars. Colony worlds were bombarded. Civilian transports were destroyed. Millions of people on both sides fled their homes and became refugees. Those refugee fleets drifted through space, looking for safety. They tried the Velkari core worlds, but were turned away. They tried the Fesic trade hubs, but were told there was no room. They tried a dozen other species, and every door was closed in their faces. Then, someone in one of those refugee fleets pointed their ship toward the Sol system, toward human space, the one border in the galaxy that had remained stable through all the chaos. They arrived at the beacon line, expecting to be turned away like everywhere else. Instead, they found something that made them weep. Humanity had built a massive aid station just outside their territorial boundary. Medical ships, food transports, temporary housing modules, human volunteers in white uniforms stood ready to receive them. The refugees were fed, their wounded were treated, their children were given warm beds, and not a single human asked for anything in return. Word spread quickly. More refugee fleets came. Then more. Within weeks, hundreds of thousands of displaced aliens were living in human-built aid stations along the border of Sol space. Humanity fed them all. But humanity still refused to rejoin galactic politics. The aid was given freely, with no conditions. It was charity in the purest sense of the word. This made many in the Concord furious. It was, they said, a calculated insult. Humanity was showing the galaxy that they could be generous without the Concord, that they did not need alien approval to do good. Some called it propaganda. Others, mostly those who had been fed and healed by human hands, called it something else. They called it kindness. The economic collapse continued. The galactic credit, once the universal currency of civilization, lost 60% of its value. Trade between species ground nearly to a halt. It turned out that the whole financial system had been built on trust, and humanity had been the source of that trust. Human banks had guaranteed loans. Human merchants had honored contracts. Human financial institutions had served as the neutral ground where ancient enemies could do business safely. Without that neutral ground, nobody would trade with anybody. Everyone suspected everyone else of cheating. Factories closed. Supply chains broke. Worlds that had imported their food began to starve. Worlds that had imported their medicine began to sicken. The galaxy was learning, in the hardest way possible, that civilization was not held together by politicians making speeches. It was held together by the quiet, unglamorous work of keeping ships running, goods moving, and systems functioning. And humans had done more of that work than anyone had ever realized. Then came the infrastructure failures. Across the galaxy, alien species began to discover that their own core systems had been built with human engineering. Power plants on colony worlds had been designed by human engineers. Atmospheric processors that kept alien cities breathable had been installed by human contractors. Computer systems that ran everything from hospitals to transportation networks used human software. And all of that technology needed maintenance, updates, repairs. The kind of work that humans have been doing quietly for centuries. The kind of work that nobody noticed until it stopped. On a Valkyrie core world called Thanaxis Prime, the main reactor that powered the capital city began to behave strangely. Temperatures rose, warning lights flashed. Valkyrie engineers swarmed the facility, but the reactor's design was human. The control systems were written in human code. The safety protocols were based on human engineering principles that the Valkyrie had never studied. The reactor was heading toward meltdown. 12 million Valkyrie lived in the capital city. In the end, the world was saved by a 73-year-old retired human engineer named Thomas Park. He had lived on Thanaxis Prime for 40 years, married to a Valkyrie, raising a family. He was not a representative of Earth. He was not acting on anyone's orders. He was just a man who knew how the reactor worked because he had helped build it decades ago. Thomas walked into the reactor facility, sat down at the control panel, and fixed the problem in 6 hours. When the Valkyrie engineers asked him how he had done it, he shrugged and said, "I read the manual, I wrote the manual." The story of Thomas Park spread across the galaxy. It became a symbol of everything the alien species had gotten wrong. Here was an old human, living quietly among them, who had saved 12 million lives because he understood systems that the Valkyrie themselves did not understand. Systems built on their own world, in their own city. They had been surrounded by human skill and human knowledge their entire lives, and they had never once thought to say thank you. Speaker Zelthos did not survive the political fallout. A vote of no confidence removed him from power, the first time in Concord history that a speaker had been forced out. His replacement was a Fesic diplomat named Counselor Mavari. She was quiet, thoughtful, and carried the weight of her new position with visible grief. Her first act as the new leader of the Concord was not a policy announcement or a military order. It was a speech, and it was very short. "We were fools," she said. "We laughed at the people who held our civilization together. We mocked them while they bled for us. We took everything they offered and gave nothing back. And when they finally had enough and walked away, we laughed again. We told ourselves they would come crawling back." She paused. "And we are the ones who are crawling now." The chamber was silent. For the first time in living memory, no one in the Galactic Concord had anything clever to say. That night, alone in the speaker's office, Counselor Mavari sat at her desk and wrote a letter. Not a formal diplomatic document, not a political demand, a personal letter written by hand addressed to Ambassador Ilara Voss of the United Human Systems. "Ambassador Voss," the letter began, "I will not waste your time with excuses. There are no excuses for what we did. You gave us everything, and we gave you contempt. Your people bled for ours, and we filed complaints. You built the roads we walked on, the networks we spoke through, the systems we lived by, and we did not even see you. We see you now. I do not know if that matters anymore, but I am writing to you not as a politician, not as a leader, but as one person to another. I am not coming with demands. I am not coming with conditions. I am coming with the only thing I have left to offer, an apology. I am sorry. We are sorry." She sealed the letter and held it in her hands for a long time. Then she called for a shuttle. One small shuttle, unarmed, with no escort. She would deliver the letter herself. On the bridge of the HSS Perseverance, Admiral Cale Marin read the daily intelligence reports. Wars, famine, plagues, collapsing infrastructure, refugee crises. The galaxy was falling apart, and it was all documented in clean, precise military language on his screen. His aide asked him, as she did every day, whether he had a recommendation for Earth's Council. Marin stared at the reports for a long moment. Then he typed 2 words, the same 2 words he had typed every day for months. Counselor Mivari's shuttle, arrived at the beacon line on a Tuesday. She came alone. One small ship, no weapons, no escort fleet, no flags of office. Just a tired, Thessic diplomat in a borrowed shuttle with a handwritten letter. The young lieutenant on the human corvette hailed her and delivered the standard message. Hold position. A response would be provided in 6 to 8 standard weeks. Mavari said, "I understand." Then she powered down her engines and waited. She waited for 4 weeks. Every morning, she sent a brief, polite message to the corvette. Not a demand, not a complaint, just a simple greeting. "Good morning. I am still here. I hope you are well." The corvette crew never responded, but they watched her on their sensors, day and night. They saw her lights go on each morning and off each evening. They saw that she rationed her food carefully. They saw that she never once tried to cross the line. On the 14th day, the corvette's communications officer looked at the lieutenant and said, "She's really not going to leave, is she?" The lieutenant shook her head. "No, she's not." On the 28th day, a message came from Earth. It was addressed to the corvette commander, but meant for Mavari. "Counselor Mavari, your letter has been received. Ambassador Voss will meet with you. Please follow the escort to Geneva." A human frigate arrived to guide her in. As Mavari's shuttle crossed the beacon line and entered Sol's space, she pressed her face against the viewport and looked out at the human territory she had never visited in her life. It was clean, organized, calm. Ships moved in orderly patterns. Stations hummed with activity. There was no chaos here, no desperation. Humanity was doing just fine without the galaxy. That realization hurt more than anything. On Earth, in a quiet office overlooking Lake Geneva, Ambassador Elara Voss sat at her desk and read Mavari's letter for the 11th time. Each time she read it, she found something new in the words. Not political language, not diplomatic tricks, just pain and honesty, written by someone who had nothing left to hide behind. Elara had spent the past year watching the galaxy burn from a distance. She had watched the wars, the famines, the plagues, the collapse. She had received hundreds of messages from alien governments, some demanding, some threatening, some begging. She had ignored them all. But this letter was different. This letter was not from a government, it was from a person. She cried. For the first time in over a year, sitting alone in her office, she cried. Not for herself, not for humanity, for all of it, for the waste, for the stupidity, for the 340 crew members who had died saving ships whose owners could not even say thank you, for the galaxy that had everything and threw it away over pride. The next morning, she brought the letter to the United Governance Council. The council chamber in Geneva was simple compared to the Great Hall of the Concorde. Plain walls, wooden desks, no floating platforms or holographic displays. Humans had always preferred to keep their important rooms humble. The debate was fierce. Councillor James Okafor, representing the African Union bloc, spoke first. "We are thriving," he said. "Our economy has grown 12% since we left. Our people are safe. Our ships are home. Why should we go back to a galaxy that treated us like servants?" Councillor Lin Mei-Shing of the Pacific States agreed. Public opinion is clear. 83% of human citizens oppose re-engagement. They remember the laughter. They remember the insults. They are angry, and they have every right to be. Others spoke in the same direction. The message was clear. Humanity was better off alone. Let the galaxy fix its own problems. Then, Elara stood. She did not argue with the numbers. She did not challenge the anger. She accepted all of it. "You are right," she said. "They treated us terribly. They laughed at us. They used us. And we have every right to walk away and never look back." She paused. "But I did not come here to talk about rights. I came to talk about who we are." The chamber grew quiet. "There are people dying out there," she said. "Not because of war, Not because of evil, because systems we built are failing, and nobody knows how to fix them. Children on worlds we have never visited are sick because the medicine we made is gone. Refugees are drifting in the dark because every door in the galaxy is closed to them except ours. This woman flew alone to our border and waited for a month in the cold of space because she had nothing left except the courage to say she was sorry. She did not demand. She did not threaten. She just waited, and she hoped. Alara looked around the room. We have the power now. All of it. The galaxy cannot force us to do anything. So the question is not whether we should go back. The question is, what kind of people are we when we have all the power, and the other side has none? The room was silent for a long time. Then Admiral Kale Maren spoke. Everyone turned to look at him. Maren was the hardliner, the military man, the one who had typed "not yet" every single day for a year. If anyone in the room would argue against going back, it was him. He stood slowly and looked at the council with tired eyes. 6 months ago, he said, I discovered that 3 of my captains had been running unauthorized rescue missions along the border. They were pulling alien ships out of minefields, treating wounded refugees, escorting civilian transports through pirate territory. He paused. I should have disciplined them. Instead, I quietly assigned more ships to help. He let that sit for a moment. My crews could not just watch people die, he said. That is not who we are. It was never who we are. I have spent a year saying not yet. I am here today to say now. The vote was held. It passed by a margin of 7 votes. Humanity would re-engage with the galaxy, but not on the old terms. Never again on the old terms. Over the next 2 weeks, Alara and her team drafted the new Soul Accords. It was a document unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Humanity was not asking to rejoin the Concord. The Concord was dead. Instead, a new body would be created, the Galactic Assembly, built on rules that would prevent the old abuses from ever happening again. Every species would contribute to shared defense based on their ability. No more free riders hiding behind human soldiers. Infrastructure would be shared knowledge, taught openly and maintained collectively, so that no single species would carry the burden alone. A permanent human-led mediation corps would have binding authority to resolve disputes, and its decisions would be final. Humanity's engineering, science, and cultural contributions would be formally recognized and protected. And every species that had voted to reduce humanity's standing on that day, over a year ago, would issue a public, formal apology. The terms were not harsh. They were fair. But fairness, after centuries of being taken for granted, felt revolutionary. Alara presented the accords to Mavari in a small meeting room in Geneva. Just the 2 of them, sitting across a wooden table. No cameras, no audience. Mavari read the document carefully, page by page. When she finished, she looked up at Alara. These terms will be difficult for many species to accept, she said. I know, said Alara. They will have to admit they were wrong, publicly. Yes. Mavari was quiet for a moment. Then she said, good. It should be difficult. Easy forgiveness teaches nothing. She signed the document on behalf of the remains of the Concord. Alara signed on behalf of humanity. They shook hands across the table. Mavari's 8 arms trembled slightly as she did it. 2 days later, Mavari was escorted back to her shuttle and guided to the beacon line. As she left Soul Space, she looked out the viewport one last time and saw something that stopped her breathing. In orbit around Mars, stretching across thousands of kilometers of space, was a fleet of ships being loaded with supplies. Medical ships, engineering vessels, construction platforms, food transports, rescue frigates, thousands of them, and more arriving every hour. They were aid ships. Humanity had already begun preparing to help the galaxy before the vote had even been finalized, before the accords were signed, before anyone had asked. They had started building the rescue fleet the same week Mavari had arrived at the beacon line, because someone in the council had looked at the reports from the border, the refugees, the plagues, the failing reactors, and had said, "Start loading the ships. Whatever happens, those people need help." Mavari stared at the fleet through her viewport, and tears rolled down her face. Not tears of relief, tears of shame. Because this was who humanity had always been. This was who they had always been, and the galaxy had laughed at them for it. She turned away from the window and began composing a message to every species in the dying Concord. It was short. They are coming to help us. They were always going to help us. Sign the accords, every single one of you. We do not deserve them, but they are coming anyway. The signing ceremony was held on Earth, not on Nexus Primus, not on some grand orbital station floating in the void between stars. On Earth itself, in the old city of Geneva, in a building that humans had used centuries ago to found their own United Nations. It was a deliberate choice. Humanity wanted the galaxy to come to them, to see where it all started, to stand on the small blue world that had quietly carried civilization on its back for 300 years. Over 3,000 species sent representatives. Their ships filled Earth's orbit in a cloud of metal and light that could be seen from the ground. Shuttles descended through the atmosphere in long, careful lines, guided by human air traffic controllers who handled the chaos with the calm efficiency that the galaxy had finally learned to respect. Most of the alien representatives had never visited Earth before. Many had never even thought about it. Earth was small. Earth was just one world among billions, or so they had believed. When they stepped out of their shuttles and looked around, they were stunned. Not by grand monuments or towering technology, by the planet itself. The sky was blue in a way that no hologram had ever captured. The air carried the scent of grass and rain and something else, something alive that they could not name. Mountains rose in the distance. A lake glittered in the morning light. Birds sang. The Drogari ambassador, a massive reptilian creature built for war, stood in a garden outside the conference hall and watched a small bird land on a branch. He stared at it for a very long time. His aide asked if he was all right. He said, "This is the most beautiful world I have ever seen, and I did not even know it existed." That was the thing. Most of the galaxy had never bothered to learn about Earth. They had used humanity's labor, humanity's ships, humanity's medicine, humanity's engineers, and they had never once asked where those humans came from. They had never wondered what kind of world could produce a species so stubborn and so kind at the same time. Now they were standing on that world, and they understood. The ceremony took place in the Great Assembly Hall. It was not a large room by galactic standards. The ceiling was high, but not impossibly so. The walls were made of stone and glass. Sunlight came through the windows and fell in golden bars across the floor. There were no floating platforms, no holographic displays, no gravity manipulators. Just rows of seats, a wooden podium, and the flags of Earth's nations hanging on the walls. It was humble, and it was perfect. Ambassador Elara Voss opened the ceremony with a short speech. She did not gloat. She did not remind the galaxy of its failures. She said only this: "We are here today not because we won something, but because we all lost something, and we have decided together that we do not want to lose it again. Let us begin." Then the apologies started. One by one, representatives of the species that had wronged humanity stood at the podium and spoke. Some were eloquent, their words carefully chosen and delivered with dignity. Others struggled. They stumbled over their sentences. They paused. They looked out at the human faces in the audience and could not find the right things to say. The Valkyrie representative was the one the whole galaxy was watching. Her name was Sithari, and she was the daughter of former speaker Gelthos, the same Gelthos who had laughed at humanity. The same Gelthos who had said, "Let the children sulk." He had died 6 months earlier, disgraced and alone, and his daughter had volunteered to take his place at the ceremony. Sithari walked to the podium on her 4 legs, her insectoid body trembling. She opened her mandibles to speak, and no sound came out. She tried again. Her voice cracked. "My father," she began, and then she stopped. She stood at the podium for a long, terrible, silent moment. Then she said, "My father was wrong. He was wrong about everything. About you. About us. About what strength means and what weakness looks like." Her voice broke completely. "I am sorry. I am so sorry." She could not continue. She stood there, shaking, unable to speak or move. The hall was completely silent. 3,000 species watched a young Valkyrie woman fall apart at a wooden podium on an alien world, and nobody knew what to do. Then Alara Voss stood up from her seat. She walked across the hall, climbed the steps to the podium, and put her arms around Sithari. She held her. A human woman holding an insectoid alien, 2 species that could not have looked more different, standing together in a beam of sunlight in a room full of people who had forgotten how to be kind. The image was broadcast to every corner of the galaxy. 10 trillion beings saw it. And something shifted. Not politically, not economically. Something deeper than that. Something in the heart of civilizations that had grown too proud to feel shame, and too old to believe in change. After the ceremony, the real work began. Human engineering teams fanned out across the galaxy. They rebooted relay stations. They stabilized failing reactors. They delivered medicine to plague-stricken worlds. They repaired atmospheric processors on colony worlds, where the air had been growing thin for months. They did the work they had always done. The quiet, unglamorous, essential work of keeping civilization alive. But this time, they did something different. They trained others. At every station, every reactor, every hospital, human engineers sat down with their alien counterparts and taught them. They shared the schematics. They explained the code. They opened the manuals that had always been written in human languages and translated them into 100 alien tongues. "We are not doing this alone again," Alara told Mavari during an inspection tour of a newly repaired relay station. "Next time, you need to be able to stand on your own. That is not an insult. It is a gift." Mavari nodded slowly. "It is the greatest gift anyone has ever given us," she said. The Dragari-Ul War, which had raged for almost a year and killed millions, was ended in 11 days. The new human-led mediation corps brought both sides to the table aboard the HSS Perseverance. Admiral Cale Marin presided over the talks personally. He was not a diplomat. He was a soldier. But soldiers understand war better than anyone, and both sides could see in his eyes that he knew exactly what they had been through. The peace treaty was signed in the ship's mess hall, over cups of coffee. It was not a grand ceremony. It was 2 exhausted peoples agreeing that they had bled enough. Marin shook hands with both leaders and said, "If either of you breaks this peace, I will come find you personally." He said it with a smile, but nobody thought he was joking. The Galactic Assembly, the new body that replaced the old Concord, held its first session 1 month later. It was smaller than the Concord had been, quieter, less grand, but it worked. Decisions were made, disputes were settled, contributions were shared, and at the center of every discussion, every negotiation, every difficult conversation, there were humans, not as servants, not as background workers, as partners, as equals, as the people everyone turned to when the room got stuck, and someone needed to say the thing that nobody else was willing to say. 50 years passed. On a warm afternoon, in a garden on Earth, an elderly woman sat on a bench and watched the clouds drift across a blue sky. Elara Voss was 112 years old. She had retired decades ago. Her hair was white, her hands were spotted with age, and her eyes were still sharp. A young Velkari approached her, a student, working on a dissertation about what the galaxy now called the Silence, the period when humanity had withdrawn. She was nervous. Meeting the legendary Ambassador Voss was like meeting a figure from a history book. Elara smiled at her and gestured to the bench. "Sit down. My neck hurts from looking up at you people." She asked many questions, and Elara answered them all with the patience of someone who had spent a lifetime talking to aliens. Finally, the student asked the question she had come all this way to ask. "Ambassador Voss, do you think the galaxy has truly changed?" Elara considered this for a long time. She watched a bird land on the grass, peck at something, and fly away. She thought about the laughter in the Concord chamber all those years ago. She thought about Mavari waiting alone at the beacon line. She thought about Sithari trembling at the podium. She thought about Thomas Park saving 12 million lives because he had written the manual. She thought about Admiral Marin typing "not yet" every day for a year, and then standing up and saying, "now." Then she smiled. "Let me ask you something instead," she said. "When was the last time anyone called humanity young?" The student opened her mouth to answer, and then stopped. She searched her memory. She went through every lecture, every textbook, every conversation she had ever had about humans, and she realized, with a quiet shock, that she could not find a single instance. Not one. Not in her entire life. She looked at Elara with wide eyes. Elara just smiled and looked back at the sky. Far above them, beyond the blue, beyond the atmosphere, beyond the moon and Mars and the beacon line, the galaxy turned. 10,000 worlds spun in the light of their suns. Ships traveled the relay networks that human hands had built and alien hands now maintained together. Wars that had once seemed endless were memories. Species that had never spoken to each other now traded and talked and argued and laughed in the halls of the Galactic Assembly. And on every one of those worlds, in languages that no human tongue could shape, a new proverb had taken root. It was spoken in halls of power by leaders who had learned humility the hard way. It was whispered in the dark of space by travelers who had once taken the stars for granted. It was taught to children in schools on planets that humanity had never visited, but had saved all the same. The proverb was simple. It needed no explanation. Everyone who heard it understood it immediately, because everyone had lived through the time when the words became true. Do not ask what humanity does for you. Ask what happens when they stop.